Hey everyone, thank you for coming back and attending my lecture series on taking control of language impairment after stroke and brain injury. Today we're going to be focusing on understanding Wernicke's aphasia. So my name is Liz. I'm the owner and speech linguist pathologist at Healthy Speech Solutions, specialize in online speech therapy care in North Carolina and Florida. So today we're going to be talking about Wernicke's aphasia. I know we've talked about Wernicke's aphasia in passing earlier in the lecture, but this is our chance to dig in a little bit deeper on what it is. So Wernicke's aphasia is very different than Broca's aphasia, which we talked about word finding difficulties when communicating, dysarthria, where we talked about intonation difficulties like skimming speech, punching out sounds, or slurred speech. We talked about proxy of speech, when you're groping for the sounds, you're not able to get those sounds out that you want to communicate. But Wernicke's aphasia is different because you can talk completely fluent and have no pauses, have no interruptions in your speech, but it makes no sense. You may have words mixed in that do not belong in the sentence at that particular moment, but grammatically, if you don't listen closely, it actually sounds grammatically correct. You just then pull out individual words and you realize, you know, that table probably shouldn't have been put there. Instead of saying table, I think they were trying to refer to school, something like that. And so Wernicke's aphasia is a very interesting type of aphasia. And also the person who has a Wernicke's aphasia doesn't always recognize that when they're talking, people aren't understanding them. It's quite a phenomenon. And also, someone with Wernicke's aphasia may not recognize that they don't understand what other people are saying. So it's the fluent aphasia, meaning you speak completely fine long sentences. It just doesn't make sense. And it's a comprehension problem because you don't always understand what's being said as well. So it's a little different versus the other aphasias, and the other language impairments you talked about is more speech production focus. So it's a little bit different. So why we wanted to save this for last. So we're going to talk about, you know me, and I love my anatomy physiology. We're going to be talking about the different areas and how it's related to Wernicke's aphasia. So if we take a look at this, remember, I think you probably know from now that Broca's area, Wernicke's area, the primary motor cortex, and the acute fasciculus, it's all related in our ability to communicate. So with Broca's area in relationship to Wernicke's area, its ability to produce and coordinate sounds when speaking, and it's the ability to learn vocabulary words when speaking. That word retrieval is really important for ability to communicate and create longer sentences. When we talk about Wernicke's area, it's right here, I circled it here for you. It's the ability to understand and process speech coming in. If someone's talking and they say, I need the bathroom, you're thinking, okay, this person has to go to the bathroom. I understood that. The person says sun, and you're hearing that and you go, okay, I heard sun. No, I heard fun, or did I hear sun? I can't tell if that F is an S or an F. I'm not processing it correctly. It's really important. And also word retrieval, it's difficulty, just like Broca's aphasia, it's difficulty pulling the correct word out, which makes sense because with Wernicke's aphasia, it's very common for someone to say a word that's not a real word or say the wrong word when they mean to say something else. And remember, I talked about an earlier lecture, ear infections is a really good example of the impact that processing information can have on learning new sounds. So when children have ear infections, they're at a much, much higher risk of having articulation difficulties, having speech production difficulties, and they end up having a higher risk of requiring speech therapy to improve your ability to communicate intelligibly. But it makes sense because if you have an ear infection, or if Wernicke's area, for example, is affected, people are talking to you and you're not hearing exactly what people are saying. So if you're not hearing what people are saying, you're missing sounds in your speech. So how are you going to communicate appropriately if you're not hearing the sounds being said by other people? So you may not hear it when you're producing or recognize that you're producing a sound or word inappropriately. So it's all connected. And then, of course, we talked about the acute fasciculus in prior lectures, which is this communication between Broca's area and Wernicke's area. And this is important for speaking clearly, vocabulary learning, and communication learning. So anything you've gotten from my lecture series, nothing in the brain is in isolation. Everything is related to everything else, unfortunately. So let's keep going. So Wernicke's aphasia, let's go a little bit more in depth on what it is. So as we've talked about earlier in this lecture, it's mainly involved in the understanding and the processing of speech and written language, meaning it's not uncommon to have a word on the screen and it can be very difficult for them to understand what they're reading. It may be a little bit easier to understand symbols rather than letters and numbers. So, and also it has to do with making sentences that don't make sense. So we talked about those long, elaborate sentences, but you have no idea what the person said because the words placed into the sentence doesn't make sense. Or you can make up words that have no meaning. So instead of saying, want to say popular, you can say tapata, and you're like, okay, that was unpopular. Where did that come from? Because it's a disconnect in the brain and words are coming out. And the person may not even realize that they just said a wrong word to them. They probably spoke completely fluent and completely normal. So they really are often unaware of the mistakes that they made. So a lot of therapy is helping someone understand that their speech is different. It's really, really, really difficult to help improve someone's ability to speak appropriately if they don't realize that they're making the mistake in the first place. So Wernicke's aphasia is also, this is super, super fascinating, so that they will speak with normal intonation and pitch, even if the content in the sentence makes absolutely no sense. And I'll have some examples of that, which means that in a typical English, in American English, or in Indian English, or in other types of dialects, everyone has a rule of how our intonation and our pitch and how we raise our voice a little bit at the end of a sentence, if you're maybe asking maybe a simple question. But it's a rule of thumb, and you just do it. But when you have Wernicke's aphasia, those rules, they are still there and they work out and they work appropriately, except nothing else in the sentence makes sense. They're also very common to interrupt other people because it's about them talking, and they're not really understanding what the other person's saying. They just feel compelled to keep talking. So there can be a lot of interruptions when communicating, and often speak very rapidly and excitedly because they don't have a check mark in their brain to say, hey, you need to slow down. So reading and writing can be very difficult, as I talked about earlier. It can be a lot easier for them to understand symbols than it is to understand letters. Not always, but sometimes. But what's also super fascinating is that a lot of people think that if you have Wernicke's aphasia, you're confused, but you're not. So someone with Wernicke's aphasia can still have really good memory, can still have really good thinking skills. It's just the part of the cognition that's been affected is the part that's associated to communication and language. Meaning someone could come off as being confused, but it's because they don't have insight into understanding that they have a communication problem, and insight and difficulty understanding that other people aren't understanding them, or you're talking and people aren't understanding you. And that's where it can come off as the person being very confused, but in reality, they know what's going on. It's everything that's related to language is what's affected, which can make someone appear as being confused. So here's a great example. So Wernicke's aphasia is very common to have difficulty understanding reading. So this person is sitting in the chair and it says, Bill, don't get up. And I've worked in a lot of hospitals over the years, and in the hospitals, it's not uncommon for a bed alarm to go off and the person is getting up out of the bed and the nurse is running and saying, hey, Louie, get back in the bed. And they're like, what? No, I can walk fine. And they're weak on the left side of the body. They're not able to communicate. They're high fall risk. It happens. So with Wernicke's aphasia, typically they're able to get up and they're able to walk around, which is super fascinating. So they might look at this and says, Bill, don't get up. And they might read, get Bill up. because of the breakdown in his ability to be able to read and process the information that's in front of him. That's a comprehension issue. So here's an example. I talked about this example earlier in my lecture series. So the sentence is something really common some with Wernicke's aphasia might say. You know that Smoodle pinkered and that I want to get him round and take care of him like you want before. I have no idea what the person just said. Smoodle, pinkered, those are made up words, okay? I want to get him to go round and take care of him. Okay, grammatically, it hits all the rules, but I have no idea what was said because it was very non-specific vocabulary. So there was word retrieval errors to try to get appropriate words to create a good meaning. But grammatically, it follows all the rules of the nouns and the verbs and the sentence. Super fascinating. So here's another example. So this is an example of an adult who has Wernicke's aphasia and is talking about a mother cleaning the house while two children are in the background sneaking a snack to eat. Mother is away here working her work to get her better. But when she's looking, the two boys looking in the other part, she's working another time. So if you take a look at that sentence, which is very often heard with Wernicke's aphasia, is that the nouns and the verbs are an appropriate placement of the sentence. The subject pronouns are used appropriately, like the possessive noun, she's working. That's technically correct. The regular plural for two boys is technically correct. But the content in the sentence makes no sense. So, and the vocabulary is very nonspecific. So for like the comment in there, looking in the other part, it's very nonspecific and could have been the two boys are looking in a jar. That would have been a little more specific. Or the comment, she's working another time, could be produced as she's vacuuming the rug. So you can see how it can be, the content may not be there, but the grammar could be correct. And chances are this person when speaking had correct intonation and melody when talking that fit the English language rules. Here's another example. So this is some we've talked about early in the lecture series, has Broca's aphasia. I really want to show the drastic difference between Wernicke's aphasia, which is like a comprehension fluent aphasia, and Broca's aphasia, which is a non-fluent and pauses in the speech. So Broca's aphasia would be snack jar, fall, over, chair, water. So the vocabulary was good, but there was a lot of pauses in between each phrase because the individual was unable to create a longer sentence. And they were looking at the same exact picture with two completely different experiences based on the aphasia that they had. So an example would be, the person is thinking, I want an apple, that's what I'm thinking. So what's actually going to come out of the mouth? It's going to be, marble ye lean, I him, go graphatic. Sounds like another language in my perspective. So really, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm just tired. So really, just keep talking. I don't hear anything before my third cup of coffee anyway. So, I mean, I'm looking at this picture cracking up because I don't know about everyone here, but before I wake up and really start my day, like my husband's talking to me and I have no idea what he's saying because I'm not functioning yet. My brain hasn't turned on. I'm not ready to listen to people. And I don't even have a brain injury. So think about how difficult it can be for someone to understand if their brain isn't turning on all the time to be able to understand incoming information that's being spoken. So the person's just going to keep talking and not realize the verbal cues that people around them aren't understanding them. So I wanted to say thank you so much for coming and attending another part of my lecture series, learning about Wernicke's aphasia and a little bit of information about it. Please come to my last lecture in the lecture series. Is going to be about comprehension strategies for someone who has Wernicke's aphasia. Have a wonderful day, and I hope you come back to the rest of my lecture series. Thank you.